and welcome to another Oki Solo Channel YouTube video. So today I want to talk about what is and what isn't a Kribensis and why that matters for hobbyist breeders. So right off the bat, I'm going to address that, I imagine most of you, when I'm saying Kribensis, you're picturing this cute little fish that you often find in your local fish store. In my case, my local fish store is Watercolors Aquarium Gallery. They are located in downtown Grand Rapids in West Michigan. They're near and dear friends of mine, so you should totally check them out, and I know I'm not biased at all. That's a joke, by the way. So, definitionally speaking, this is not a Kribensis. This is Pelvicachromis pulcher. As near as I can figure out, some guy at some point got in a shipment of pulcher, misidentified them as Kribensis, and then we've all been calling them Kribensis ever since. But Kribensis is its own unique species, and it has been for, well, it was originally described in 1911, I think, and then it was synonymized with taeniatus in 1968, I think, and it wasn't revalidated until 2014. So depending on how you want to argue it, it's either been a unique species for like 10 years or like 100 years. I'm going to go with 100 years because the original description was over 100 years ago. But so it's its own unique thing. And what's really cool is if you want to poke around at what is currently defined as Kribensis, check out Lamboj et al. I'll include the paper in the description below because it's a really cool paper. It not only revalidated Kribensis, but it also helped better define what taeniatus is, partially, mostly, I guess, by defining what isn't taeniatus. And it also described Pelvicachromis drakenfelsi. So this paper did a lot of legwork. But when you're looking at the section specifically on Kribensis, you'll notice that if, for example, if you're looking at drakenfelsi, it's limited to one isolated river population. I think it's pronounced the Wouri River, and then, or Wouri, something like that. Whereas Kribensis is found in multiple streams along coastal Cameroon, and not only multiple streams, but they're in the paper itself, they're actually describing two different forms, where it's the northern form includes, I think it's pronounced the Dihan form, where it's includes populations like the Maliwe and the Idanao, and I think it's pronounced Niyang. And then there's the southern form, which would include the Lobe River and Lobe region and the Kienke region. And also this is around Kribi. That's where Kribensis comes from. It's in the Kribensis region. So that means that, this is me, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. That means that if we were going to split these two forms in their own species, the southern form would be retained as Kribensis, and then the northern form would get described in something else. But the problem is that, so I will address that, hobbyists working with these species, I think it's Michael Kijman, he posts very frequently in the West African cichlids Facebook group, and he posts a lot of photos of these different forms of Kribensis. And so if you're exposed to it a lot, you actually start being able to distinguish them visually. And I'm going to hereforth refer to that as vibes. You look at it and you have an idea that it's something distinct, but you can't quite put your finger on it. So when you're describing a species, you by definition can't do it on vibes. It has to be measurable data points. So for example, you needed to be able to be there are 9 fin rays in this form and there are 10 fin rays in this form. So these are measurable distinct character traits, and so that can be used to distinguish one from the other. Lamboj et al. Admits that with the morphometric data that they have, they couldn't describe these two forms as distinct from each other. So then the next step you would look at is genetic data, and there's very little genetic data that's going on with this species right now, and that's really unfortunate because in this paper they also allude to that there might be, especially in the southern form, some metapopulations going on, as in during floodings, it is possible like that individuals might be able to cross from one stream to another, allowing for like a minor degree of like introgression between populations. But we don't know that. That's all speculation and hypothesizing. But like looking at the genetic data, you can definitely go, there's a northern form and a southern form, but they're like, it doesn't look like that they're incredibly distinct. They are, they probably diverged fairly recently, comparatively in geological time, and trying to elucidate within the forms like these populations within them was really hard with the data set that existed in that paper. So I can hear a lot of hobbyists hearing me say this and asking questions like, why can't I just breed a Krib to a Krib? And I'm not sure it's that simple. I think a lot of us have gotten really preoccupied with the question of, if it's the same species, it's the same species and we can breed it. So, and I think a lot of people love the idea of being able to outcross between these populations because that would infuse genetic diversity into their population. Hobbyists seem to have a pretty distinct understanding of like the pitfalls of inbreeding depression, at least the ones that are like thinking about it. I also throw out there that I actually did a podcast episode for the Watercolors Aquarium Gallery podcast on strategies you can use to mitigate the negative effects of inbreeding. So like the short version is, inbreeding in and of itself isn't a problem. Deleterious alleles are. So if you can select out those deleterious alleles, you can inbreed without the negative effects of those deleterious alleles. So hobbyists are thinking about that. They're like, okay, I don't want to inbreed too much. And I will also throw out there that like there are hobbyists that are definitely not thinking about inbreeding hard enough. Because, and I'll include a paper on it, but one of the things that's really kind of like insidious about inbreeding is you actually don't often see the effects of inbreeding in your F1s. You actually, and so I feel I need to explain the filial number system real quick here when I'm using it. And hobbyists tend to use like F0 as in like wild caught fish, and then F1s are one generation removed, and that's an entirely viable strategy for using filial numbers. In this case, the context that I'm going to be using filial numbers in is that like the F0s are the fish you've brought home, and then your F1s are the ones that you have first bred yourself, and then your F2s, so on and so forth, are like the second generation you've bred in your home. Like in a breeding program, you actually don't see a lot of effects of inbreeding within an F1 generation. I think I mentioned already, I'm gonna include a paper below, but I think in their study they found, I think it was 1.6% deleterious lethal alleles were found in the F1 generation, and it jumped up to, I think it was 18% in the F2 generation. And that's something to actually, that like hobbyists, especially BAP breeders, where they'll breed something once, pass it on, and they're like, oh, the fish I bred were healthy. You don't actually know that until you're 2 generations in. So that's something to think about. Breeding something for multiple generations actually can teach you a lot about like what the genes of the specific fish you have are behaving like. And I think that's an important point to think about, because just because they worked out for you doesn't mean they're going to work out for whoever you passed on your F1s on to for their broodstock. So we've talked about inbreeding depression and the strategies that people will use, that there are strategy out there that people can use to mitigate those effects, but no one really talks about outbreeding depression. And outbreeding depression is this idea that like they're genetically so distinct from each other that they actually start getting incompatibilities. And so a really obvious example that people can think of are like mules, where there are these infertile hybrids between 2 species. But outbreeding depression can happen much more narrow scale, and I will include one final paper. You can actually document outbreeding depression between strains of zebra danios, where these strains are genetically isolated enough from each other within species, within captive populations, that various strains will actually, like some strains can outcross and have, it's called hybrid vigor, where it's like the genetic diversity between the two of them, like coming together, actually is very beneficial. But sometimes there are incompatibilities that you can't predict ahead of time, and so like within this same paper of zebra Daniels, they found that some hybrid crosses between strains actually were beneficial, and some hybrid strains between crosses were actually very detrimental. And so when we're looking at these different populations of Kribensis, we might actually be looking at the same thing, where for all we know, we're actually risking making fish that are worse off. And what's even more crazy is that like often you don't see the effects of outbreeding depression again until your F2 generation. And so like that first round you're working with, you actually can be lulled into a false sense of security and think you did something really good. So when we're looking at these different populations, I actually think the safest strategy is to try and work with inbreeding depression, like mitigating inbreeding depression within a captive population that was collected from a specific population. And I'll throw out there, like morally, personally, I would argue that I think that we should be trying to maintain what's unique about each of these populations within captivity. Like if we're crossing these populations to each other, we're actually slowly erasing what makes each of them unique in and of themselves. And I think that's kind of sad, because that's what we've done with a lot of captive strains. Like we don't know what exactly a bristlenose pleco in captivity is anymore, because it's actually a hybrid of multiple species. And that's probably the case for like super red Apistogramma cockatoides. That's actually probably multiple different populations of cockatoides. Actually, what's now cockatoides, that's probably a super species complex. That's its own topic. Sorry, that's too big of a tangent. But like, if we're not more careful, we'll actually end up with something that's like very homogeneous. All of our Pelvicachromis kribensis, if we're not careful, will end up looking exactly the same and be like, just like with the, I'll bring up the super red cockatoides, like all super red cockatoides look the same. And that's kind of sad to me. Like they're cool in and of themselves, but we have all this variation in color. Like I love Pelvicachromis kribensis. I actually worked with them in leeway form for multiple generations and multiple years. And one of the things that was really cool to me is that each of my females had unique personalities, and they were distinguishable from females of other species. And I shouldn't say species, other populations. And they were really cool. And I think I just want more people to get into Pelvicachromis and work with the different populations, and not just get fixated on trying to create the perfect captive Kribensis, I guess. Like work on trying to make a representative form of the Edenau and a representative like Lobe. Like these are all really cool and special. So that was really long and rambly, and I'm sorry about it. Actually, I'm not sorry, but it's something that I feel pretty strongly about, and I think it's really special and cool, and we should all appreciate what is out there for us and within our own aquariums. So I hope all of you stay curious and are actually a little bit more interested in maybe trying a specific form of Pelvicachromis kribensis, or any Pelvicachromis, or any West African, I guess. But I hope you stay curious and have fun.